right, guys. So today, hopefully this doesn't take too long. I'm just going to go through some advice, just some advice for reading, writing time, just some stuff that came into my head with reference to what Vika have continuously put in those assessment reports. Just some things that me and Miss Yara would often discuss as we marked your SACs, like little common mistakes you guys would make, as well as some mistakes that you guys made on the trial exam. So just trying to collate all of that advice into one big PowerPoint, I guess. Yeah, so let's get started. So as I did with psychology, I put up the front cover of the exam on the first slide. So this is the front cover for tomorrow's exam. Vika usually release the front covers for every subject. So you guys should be able to, you already know, obviously it's an afternoon exam. And it has 14 questions. So that's the only information that's really new, I guess. It's got 14 questions, which is less than previous years. I remember one year we had 16 questions. 14 questions basically means you got one 10 mark or one 8 mark extended response, and then you got 13 like normal questions. Now, some of those questions could be single questions worth 2 marks, like question 2, define this. Some of those questions could have multiple parts. Looking at the breakdown of this, you will have a few questions that have maybe 5 or 6 parts each if we divide that number out, but we never really know. But it's always good to just have an idea of how many questions are on the exam. You guys already know the permitted materials is the same kind of stuff we've allowed you to bring into SACs all year. Write with a blue or black pen, try to bring multiple and avoid those erasable pens because sometimes the temperature of the room can cause the ink to fade. Bring highlighters, especially in health, try to bring different colors if you can, just because, especially when you're doing the 8 or 10 marker question, you can highlight different parts. Like you can make different links. So if you're linking something in source 1, which is a graph, to a case study in source 3, and there's 2 similar stuff, you can highlight them with the same color. And then when you're writing your answer, you can easily see, okay, yellow matches with yellow. I'm going to match these and bundle these up in one paragraph. So it makes it a little easier for you to make those links. A ruler is always good as well. You're never going to be asked to draw a graph, but you may be asked to interpret a graph. And sometimes having a ruler helps you to really get the most closest estimation of what the y-axis is showing, or how much percentage, or what the years of life lost or whatever are. So it's always good to bring a ruler in. A pencil and eraser are not compulsory because, again, you are asked to write in pen in the health exam, but just bring them just in case. You might want to go over a graph in pencil, or you might want to write a response in pencil first maybe. So just bring one just in case. Don't bring or use whiteout during the exam. And obviously you already know, most of you know this by now, except maybe the year 11s, you just got to bring all your stationery in a clear Ziploc bag or resealable bag, just so that your assessor can easily see what's in there. Okay, so that's just the front cover. So just going through some advice for reading time. Now, a lot of you already know this, but reading time is really a good time to just get in the zone, to mentally prepare yourself for all the things that you're going to write in those 2 hours. And trust me, you're not really going to put down your pen at any point during those 2 hours. You're just going to be writing. So reading time is a good time to really get into the zone and to give yourself that little bit of time to just process everything in front of you. It's also a really good time to properly read through those case studies, those scenarios, any of the data or the graphs that you're going to get, any source-based stimulus material that will be in your extended response questions. Reading time is a good time for you to have to actually go over those things, to be able to understand, okay, what are the links? How do I read this? What is this data telling me? So don't just skim over that within 5 minutes and be like, okay, that's it, I'm going to sleep for the next 10 minutes. Actually use that time properly, because 15 minutes doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a long time. Now, since your first reading of the scenario is your first impression or your first exposure to that stimulus material, do make a little mental note in your head of any obvious links in certain questions. For example, as you're reading in reading time, the case study about educating mothers on how to cook healthy meals to promote better maternal nutrition while they're pregnant. And as you're reading through that, lights just go off in your head, like develop personal skills. Keep a mental note of that. Sometimes when you go back to that case study in writing time, it helps to have that mental note in your head because you already know, you're already primed to kind of know what you need to start writing. Okay. And if you can't remember a specific concept as you read through a question in reading time, don't stress. Okay. You will most likely remember what that is once writing time begins. So if there's a question like question 1, describe the who priority of stable ecosystem and you don't remember what that is, it's okay. You might just remember it as you start your writing time, okay? You don't need to try to have all your answers planned out in your head in reading time, okay? That's very unrealistic. Certain questions, it's good if you've got an idea, but it doesn't mean you have to have a mental plan of every answer you're going to write in reading time, okay? So don't go in with those unrealistic expectations that you will. Advice for writing time. So on the note of unrealistic expectations, from the get-go, don't really tell yourself something like, oh, you know, the exam ends at 5:15, you know, by 4:45, I'm going to have the exam done. And from 4:45 to 5:15, I'm going to just proofread. Don't go in with those expectations because look, some of you do write fast. Some of you may be able to complete the exam before time, but majority of you will not be able to, okay? That is okay. There's no point of stressing yourself out. If I'm going to be honest, when I did my health exam many years ago, I was writing until probably the last 30 or 20 seconds. Okay. And I said this in psychology as well. I'm not a fast writer. I take my time and I do write till the very last minute. So if you're one of those people writing till the last minute, do not stress. Okay. Vika give you those 2 hours for a reason, because that is the time that is needed. Okay. To finish the exam. Some people may finish quicker, but that doesn't mean that if you don't finish half an hour early that you're some kind of failure. Okay, so don't stress too much about that. When it comes to questions in the exam, try not to leave too many questions blank. I know we always say, even in the SACs, like if there's a question you find hard, just kind of leave it blank and come back to it at the end. But you need to remember that if you leave too many questions blank, that's just more questions you're going to have to come back to at the end. And you may not have sufficient time to come back to and finish all those questions in time. So if you do have a question where you have kind of an idea of what you could write, don't leave it blank. Just write something for it. Just write the best answer you can muster up on the page and then go to the next question. Now, obviously, if there's a question that you absolutely have zero brain cells to answer, leave it blank and then hopefully you will be able to come back to it. But if there is an answer where you at least have some kind of inkling of what you can write something down, because Vika can only give you the mark if there is writing on that page or on that question. Okay, so just make sure that you don't leave too many questions blank. If you're continuing and answering the extra space at the back of the booklet, clearly specify that you are. Okay, and I said this for psychology as well. Don't just stop your answer mid-sentence and be like, okay, flip to the back of the book. Because your Vika assessor, and a lot of students do run out of time, they just stop mid-sentence. And it's really sad when you read that because it's like, okay, did that student run out of time and they weren't able to finish it? Okay, unless you specify continued at back or check back, Vika are not really going to scan that extra page because you guys know the exams are not marked physical paper-wise. They're marked through scan copies, okay? And they scan them page by page. So you have to be careful there to make sure that you, that your answer that you're continuing at the back isn't forgotten about or isn't overlooked. So clearly specify that. Also make sure that you're linking back to the key concepts within the question, and we will talk about this as well in the later part of this PowerPoint. Vika are really strict about this, guys. Health already gets a rep, and this angers every single HHD teacher in Victoria, makes us so frustrated. Health gets the rep that it's common sense or it's general knowledge or it's easy, okay? Now, we know as teachers that students do waffle in health, okay? It becomes all the more obvious that you are waffling when you don't make links back to content, okay? The absence of such links back to specific dimensions of health and well-being, the absence of links back to human development or those specific keywords and phrases automatically tells your assessor that you're just writing nonsense. Okay, so you need to really link back to those key health concepts. Otherwise, your answers are just going to be vague. And from the get-go, your assessor is going to be like, this person doesn't really have an in-depth knowledge of the content and the skills. So that's the idea for like the kind of advice for writing time, I guess you could say. All right, let's go through some more specific advice for Unit 3 HHD concepts and skills. But before that, there's a question. Do you have any extra advice on how to finish everything in the exam? Any strategies? I know health is one of those exams where, yeah, it is a really long exam. I think just don't spend an overly excessive amount of time on a question that's only worth a few marks. So if it's a 2-mark question, don't spend like 5 or 6 minutes on it. Just quickly try to get through it as soon as possible. Look at the amount of marks they've allocated to the question And also look at the amount of lines they've given you. And that's something you can also kind of gauge and determine during reading time. Like, which questions are you going to spend more time on, and which ones are you quickly going to like get out of the way? So just really planning it strategically like that is important. Also, before you just head into the question and run the risk of waffling, it's always really good to just read and see what the question is specifically asking you. So if it's saying name and describe an example of physical health and well-being, well, then you're just going to, name and describe one dimension of health and well-being. Well, you know, you got to name it and then quickly just describe it. And you don't have to go into extra knowledge about interrelationships or stuff like that. So yeah, just a matter of directly answering what the question is asking you to. But yeah, other than that, honestly, I don't know, maybe put like a speed, like, I don't know, an accelerator on your pen. I don't know. The thing is, like, you just need to write like really fast, I guess. Yeah. And that is a struggle. Trust me, I'm a slow writer, so I know. So these are some typical advice for Unit 3 HHD concepts and skills. Some mistakes you guys have made this year, as well as mistakes that are made across the board when it comes to Unit 3. The first one is do not confuse emotional and mental health and well-being. Not all of you make this mistake, but some of you still make this mistake. Just be careful, because when you talk about the fact that, oh, this person is feeling depressed, which affects their emotional health and well-being, that's automatically wrong. Depression is a mental state. It's not an emotional state. Okay. I know we say, oh, I feel depressed or I feel anxious, but they're not feelings, they're mental states. They're mental states that we experience. So just be really careful there. Also, when talking about interrelationships of health and well-being, just try to make sure that you clearly explain how one dimension of health and well-being influences or affects a change in the other. And you might use like words to indicate that interrelationship, like consequently, or this affects, or, you know, this subsequently leads to. So using those kinds of words is really important to show the connection between the two different or the three different health and well-being dimensions that you're linking back to there. As you do, some of you forget to do this, but some of you forget to clearly signpost the name of the dimension of health and well-being as you're explaining it in your answer. Maybe because you're in a rush or you're just writing it down in a flow. You forget, you say, okay, this would then cause the person to feel stressed, which would then cause them to, shy away from their friends or not meet their friends often. And in between, you've forgotten to say that this causes a person to feel stressed, which clearly indicates a decline in their mental health and well-being. So you forgot to name the dimension in between. And that's automatically going to cost you a mark there if you don't name it. Okay. I've mentioned this before in the previous trial exam feedback thing we did, but it's a mistake that across the board students make. And some of you did make this in your other trial exams you submitted. Avoid saying discovery of vaccines. When they ask you how has old public health improved health status from the 1900s to now or something like that, don't say that the discovery of vaccines is what led to the reduced incidence of measles. Okay, that's not accurate. You'd rather say that it's the mass vaccinations that actually enabled that reduction in the incidence of measles, because vaccines were discovered slightly before 1900 in a lot of countries, including Australia. It wasn't actually the discovery, but it was the fact that, okay, we've got these vaccines, we can actually mass vaccinate multiple people, and we can kind of promote a reduced incidence of disease because of that mass vaccination. So use the word mass vaccination, not discovery of vaccines. Avoid that. When mentioning a benefit of optimal health globally, link back to the global world rather than just one country within the global world, okay? So you got to talk about an example where 2 or more countries are involved. You could talk about how when people are having optimal health, they're more likely to go to work. And if the place that they go to work is in charge of importing a really important product for that country, that means that we've got better trade happening between countries. Okay, that means that we've got better life expectancy. So when we're comparing life expectancy for a low, middle, or high income country, the life expectancy is generally better because the populations in those 3 types of countries are experiencing optimal health. You could even say that there's a reduced spread of infectious disease like COVID-19 across countries. So always make it clear in your answer, if they ask you for a benefit of optimal health on a global level, that you are linking back to 2 or more countries in your answer. Okay, not specific countries, but just in general, you use words like across countries or between countries to clearly indicate that you're not just talking about one country by itself. Okay. So that's really important because a lot of you struggled with this in the trial exam as well, making links back to global health with optimal health and well-being. This is a really important one as well, guys. When asked to explain how risk factors like smoking or high BMI contribute to increased burden of disease or poor health status, avoid blanket statements like smoking contributes or smoking causes lung cancer. Okay, anyone knows that. Anyone off the street can tell you, yes, smoking causes lung cancer. That is correct. That's not wrong. That will get you a mark, but you won't get the full mark for that question because you must explain how smoking causes lung cancer. Okay. How is what we call as that middle link, the middle how link. Remember, I say a lot of you jump from A to C and you forget about the B, you forget about that middle link. So the middle link is basically difficult for a lot of students in Victoria because that's the biological link. And I know not everyone that does health needs to love biology. In fact, you don't need to be a superstar in biology to do well in health, but that middle link is very important. So saying something as simple as the cancer-causing substances in cigarettes damage the lining of the lungs, which obviously damages the lung tissue, that's enough. That's a middle link, and that contributes over time to lung cancer. Okay, so making that middle link is really important, and a lot of you forget it, which is why a lot of you, if that question is out of 3 marks, you automatically lose a mark or 2 straight off the bat. When linking back Medicare, PBS, NDIS, private health insurance to those 4 different kind of features of the healthcare system like access, funding, sustainability, and equity, try to link back to a specific aspect of each of those compared to just making general links. So it's better for you to say that Medicare promotes access because all Australian citizens and permanent residents can access the basic and essential healthcare that Medicare provides. That's a really good specific to Medicare kind of link, as opposed to just making a blanket statement like Medicare can be accessed by all Australians, which is anyway incorrect because not all Australians can access Medicare. And it also sounds very generic. It's not specific to Medicare and the kind of eligible groups that are under Medicare. Similarly, if I was making a link to PBS, I would say PBS isn't accessible by all Australians, but it does promote access because some of those disadvantaged groups like healthcare card holders, low-income concession card holders, they can actually access PBS, which allows them to purchase vital medications at affordable prices. So I'm still acknowledging those specific groups that are specific under the PBS, as opposed to just saying, oh, people who have low incomes. Okay, I'm using actual terminology like concession card, healthcare card holders. So you got to make it specific to that particular feature of the healthcare system that you're discussing. On the note of being specific, when you're discussing food selection models, and this is a notoriously poorly attempted topic across the board, across all the years, not just in our school, but across the board, students really get confused between the food selection models. When you're asked to explain the benefit of a food selection model or how does a food selection model promote health status, don't make a really generic statement like, oh, you know, the Nutrition Australia's healthy eating pyramid promotes healthy eating. Well, duh, of course it promotes healthy eating. You need to make it more specific. So you could say that the healthy eating pyramid allows Australians to select a healthier diet or select more nutritious dietary choices to maintain health if they're already healthy, or to prevent chronic disease if they're on the way to getting a disease or if they're on the way to becoming ill. Okay. And then you need to specify which aspect of that food selection model enables or allows that to occur. This is the important bit that a lot of people forget to do. Okay. All the food selection models have the common goal of this thing that I just talked about. They allow people to make healthier and more nutritious dietary choices. You need to hone in on the specific aspect of the model that actually makes that occur, okay, or makes that healthy food selection possible. So for Nutrition Australia's healthy eating pyramid, we could say that because there's a larger level of the pyramid dedicated to vegetables, that allows any person, even a child in primary school, to be able to quickly recognize that, okay, I got to eat more vegetables because they're a healthy choice for my diet. Okay, honing in on those specific features of the food selection model, whether you're honing in on the appearance of the model, whether it's a pie model, as we see with the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, or a pyramid-based model, whether it's just lines of text, as we see with the Australian Dietary Guidelines, as long as you hone in on those specific features of those food selection models, how people would use or read or interpret those models, That's how you're going to secure those marks for these kinds of questions. Because even in our practice exam that we did on the holidays, a lot of you just skipped the question on dietary guidelines. You were like, no, I'm not going to do it. Which again was evidence that this is probably a topic that a lot of you kind of are a bit intimidated by. So something just to keep in mind. Okay, so let's move on to the next, Unit 4. I think some of you might have already been reading some of this as I was typing the last few before, but if you're asked to describe characteristics of low, middle, and high income countries, you got to be specific with how you word them and how you compare them. So don't just say low income countries have low literacy rates or low literacy levels, whereas high income countries do not. Actually say high income countries in comparison tend to have higher literacy rates, as evident by, easier access to educational facilities or something like that. Give more detail and make an actual justified comparison there. In questions on sustainability, regardless of whether the question's asking you to link back to social, economic, or environmental sustainability, try to make a link back to how that allows a future generation to live according to their needs and interests. So, for example, by conserving environmental resources like water and ensuring that a community has a clean and uncontaminated water supply, we can allow the future generations that grow up and live in that community to be able to have clean water to drink and not have water that makes them sick and that makes them not be able to attend school or not be able to attend work. Okay, so we want to link back to the future generations. How is achieving any of those 3 types or 3 dimensions of sustainability now going to help people well into the future? That's really important to make that link there. Some of you get mixed up between the dimensions and the indicators of the HDI. They're not interchangeable words. So if a question is asking you to explain how an indicator of the HDI or how achieving or working towards achieving an indicator of the HDI is going to improve health status, and you start talking about, I don't know, decent standard of living as opposed to gross national income, you are going to automatically lose the mark, because you need to be able to differentiate between the 3 dimensions and the 4 indicators. Okay, remembering the 3 dimensions are those broader categories and the indicators are how we measure. Okay, some of you, for that second dimension, which is knowledge or being knowledgeable, some of you also sometimes forget to mention both of those indicators. Okay, there are 2 indicators for dimension number 2, which is knowledge, which is mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling. For the dimension, is it knowledge? It can be either one. So your book uses being knowledgeable, but knowledge is also correct. So both are fine. So yeah, just make sure that you mention both of those. That those are not synonyms for each other. That's why I've clearly written the word and instead of or. Okay, you got to mention both if you're asked to explain those. Whenever you're asked a question about the who, or how a scenario or program or case study reflects the work of the who, you need to link back to one of those 6 core functions, the really long ones that all of us were like annoyed about. You need to link back to one or more of those, depending on how much the question is asking you, I guess. Not the 3 easier to remember priorities. So you're not linking back to promoting healthier populations and all that stuff. You're linking back to the longer ones, like conduct health and wellbeing research and information, all that kind of stuff, set norms and standards and monitor their implementation. Those 6 core functions is what you need to link back to. If the question says work of the who, if the question says who priorities, you're just linking back to those 3 shorter priorities that we learned. When providing an example of how individuals or groups can take social action, you must ensure that your chosen type of social action matches the example that you're providing. So it's all good and well for you to learn about petitions as an example of a social action, but if your example doesn't really connect well to the actual explanation you're giving, it's not going to make a lot of sense. So if I say, for example, I want to do a petition to increase awareness of gender inequality in a low-income country, a petition is something where you're agreeing to put your signature for something to happen. It's some kind of a commitment. It makes more sense for you to increase awareness about gender equality by making a post on social media, or by running a fundraiser where people will attend and will be asking you questions. Okay, what is your fundraiser about? And then you will tell them what it's about. So it's kind of like you've got to choose the correct type of social action to match the purpose for which it is intended. Okay, remembering that not all types of social action are appropriate for all purposes and all kinds of examples. So just choose the one that best matches the example that you're giving there. Do we need to know them word for word? I think that question is with reference to the core functions. You don't have to know them word to word, but I'd say you have to know them about at least 85 to 90% exact. It doesn't have to be 100% exact. If you miss a word here or there, it should be okay. But more or less, it has to resemble the actual core function. And I know that's really useless. It's just needless memorization, but that's what Vika expect. If a question asks, why might people take social action? I don't think they would actually ask such a generic question, but you could just say to increase awareness on issues that are happening in low or middle income countries, to fight inequality or to fight injustices like gender inequality, child labor, all that kind of stuff. Or you could say people might take social action to to raise money or to fundraise wherever monetary support it will be helpful. People might take social action, have a barbecue fundraiser to raise money for countries. And that's especially the case with reference to countries that are going through things like natural disasters, or countries where there's a lot of poverty, where actual money might be of use to get them like basic facilities and stuff like that, to build a toilet or to build a well or something like that. So yeah, those are 3 possible answers you could include. All righty. So let's go through some, do we need to memorize NGOs like World Vision and Red Cross? No, so generally Vika test that topic, which is 13, I think that's 12 that's the middle of chapter 12. World Vision, Red Cross, Oxfam, you don't need to know what they are and you don't need to know their objectives in depth, but you do need to be able to just interpret a case study. So for example, when you get a case study about gender inequality, it might be something that the World Vision or that the Red Cross is running. And so whatever case studies or programs you get from them, you just need to be able to interpret and answer questions related to that. They're not going to ask you, name or identify when Red Cross was established. That's a really generic question. They would never ask that. Okay. All right. We've got about 5 minutes left. What we'll do is, okay, I might actually get everyone to just 4 minutes. In fact, what I'll do is I will finish this slide and then we'll probably end the Zoom and then you guys can rejoin, because otherwise I think it will time out. But before that, I will answer 2 questions on the chat. So for private health insurance incentives, you previously said we don't need age-based discount. We don't need it for the exam, right? Look, age-based discount is a weird one because it's not actually, it's just something brand new. Even if it does come up in the exam, which it shouldn't, but if it does, just know that it's just about the fact, it's very similar to lifetime health cover. It's the same purpose. The fact that when you take out private health cover at an earlier age or at a younger age, you get a discount for it. So you get discounted for it. So it's kind of the opposite of lifetime health cover. Lifetime health cover kind of punishes you with a 2% loading fee if you take out health cover after the age of 30. Whereas private health insurance, the age-based discount rewards you if you take out private health cover a little bit earlier. Yeah. So that's the basis of it. But I don't think they will actually assess that in the exam. The other 3 are more prevalent across textbooks, especially because I think it's only the Jacaranda book that actually has the age-based discount. The other company ones don't. For global trends, is mass migration and conflict 2 different things, or do we answer as one trend? They are considered 2 different things. They're put together in the book and in the PowerPoint because conflict generally leads to mass migration, or in other words, mass migration is a consequence of conflict. So often when you're explaining one, sometimes you may automatically start explaining the other, but not necessarily always the case. Think of it this way. If you're explaining mass migration, you will almost always explain conflict within that. But conflict is something that you can explain without talking about mass migration. You can just talk about the injuries people get from conflict, how it feels to live in a country, to continue living in a country that's going through conflict. So yeah, hopefully that kind of makes sense. I saw a question mentioning why someone would switch from Medicare to private health insurance after reaching the age of 30. Why is this the case? You wouldn't really switch from Medicare to private health insurance. You can still access Medicare. But the reason why you might switch to private health insurance after reaching the age of 30, first of all, you are going to get slapped with that 2% loading fee. But the reason you might switch to private health insurance is that after the age of 30, generally research shows that people develop more health issues, especially with reference to things like their joints and that kind of stuff, as well as a lot of more dental issues. So having private health insurance, because all private health insurance provides all those extra additional services, it may actually be more affordable for you to be able to have dental covered, to be able to have physiotherapists covered, and chiropractors covered, and be able to, as you're getting older and as you're passing the age of 30 and you're developing all these health issues, you're able to quickly and affordably kind of access those services that can help you to kind of reduce your morbidity and improve your health and well-being, as opposed to living with morbidity and living with pain and not being able to go to a physio or chiro because you can't afford it or because it's just too expensive. So that could be one answer for that question there. Yeah. All right. What we'll do, guys, is I will pick up from the recording. Yeah, I'll pick up from this slide when we rejoin the Zoom. So what I'll ask you guys to do is I'll just ask you to leave this Zoom and then just rejoin using the same link you used to come in here. Yeah, you're going to join, not a new Zoom, just re-click the same link that you used to come into this one. So what I'll do is I'll stop the recording here.